The things we ignore. Welcome. Tonight's story isn't about a haunted house, an abandoned hospital, or a monster hiding in the woods. It's about someone. Someone whose day was so ordinary that, if they hadn't paid attention to one impossible moment, they would have forgotten it like every other Tuesday. Maybe you'll recognize parts of their routine. Maybe you won't. Either way, this is only a story. Their alarm rang at 6:30. Not that it mattered. They had already been awake for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince themselves that getting out of bed was somehow worth the effort. The room wasn't messy. It wasn't clean either. It simply looked lived in. The kind of room that silently collects unfinished plans. They reached for their phone. 3 notifications. 1 weather update. A group chat they hadn't opened in 2 days. A reminder they had snoozed yesterday. Nothing important. Nothing memorable. They sighed, got out of bed, walked to the bathroom, and stared into the mirror longer than they meant to. Not because anything looked wrong. Just because they looked tired. Really tired. The shower helped. For a while. Hot water. The sound of running water drowning out every unnecessary thought. It almost felt peaceful. Almost. Then, for no reason they could explain, they suddenly felt cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from the room. The kind that lasts only a second. A chill that starts somewhere behind your shoulders and slides slowly down your spine. It disappeared almost immediately. They looked around the bathroom. Everything was normal. They laughed quietly. Guess I'm more tired than I thought. And that was enough of an explanation. Breakfast was quick. Coffee that tasted weaker than yesterday. Toast that they barely remembered eating. The morning moved exactly the way mornings always do. People crossing streets without looking up. Cars waiting at lights. Someone arguing over the phone. Someone else laughing at a video. Everyone busy pretending they knew where they were going. So were they. Hours passed. Work. Or maybe school. It doesn't really matter. Because whichever one it was, it felt exactly the same. 8 hours trying to convince yourself to care about something that probably wouldn't matter next week. A few conversations. A few fake laughs. Someone asked how they were doing. Good. They answered automatically. The other person smiled. So am I. Neither of them meant it. By lunchtime, their eyes already hurt from staring at a screen. They rubbed them. Looked away for a second. That's when it happened again. A strange feeling. Not fear. Not exactly. Just that tiny instinct. The one that quietly whispers. Someone is standing behind you. They turned around. Nothing. Just coworkers. People typing. Someone making coffee. Someone scrolling on their phone. No one even looked in their direction. Their heart beat a little faster anyway. Only for a few seconds. Then, buzz. Their phone vibrated. A direct message. Just a friend sending a meme. They smiled. Answered with a laughing emoji. Forgot the feeling completely. The afternoon dragged on. Outside, clouds gathered. Inside, time refused to move. When the day finally ended, they walked home the same route they'd taken hundreds of times before. Streetlights flickered on. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The evening air was still. Comfortably still. Until, for one brief moment, it felt as though someone had just walked past them. Close enough that they almost stepped aside. Except, no one was there. They stopped walking. Looked behind them. An empty sidewalk. The sound of traffic somewhere far away. Nothing else. Their heartbeat rose again. Not enough to panic. Just enough to notice. A few deep breaths later, everything felt normal. Again. By the time they got home, exhaustion had settled into every muscle. Shoes off. Bag dropped beside the door. Lights on. Silence. The kind of silence that's supposed to feel comforting. Instead, it just felt heavy. They opened Instagram. Scroll. Vacation photos. Perfect couples. Someone announcing a promotion. Someone showing off a new apartment. Someone claiming they'd finally figured life out. They kept scrolling. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15. By the time they closed the app, they somehow felt worse than before they opened it. So they switched to YouTube. Maybe something funny. Maybe music. Instead, their fingers typed 2 words. Horror stories. Hundreds of videos appeared. One thumbnail caught their attention. Not because it looked scary. Because it didn't. It showed an empty apartment hallway. Dim lighting. Plain walls. Nothing unusual. Curiosity won. They put on their earbuds. Lay back against the pillow. Pressed play. The narrator spoke calmly. No loud music. No screaming. Just a quiet voice telling a story while ordinary images faded into one another. Rain falling outside a window. An empty bus stop. A kitchen at night. A staircase lit by a single bulb. Nothing about the images felt threatening, which somehow made them harder to stop watching. Then, for less than a second, they thought they saw something. 2 tiny points. Like eyes. Watching from the darkness at the end of a hallway. They blinked. The image changed. They paused the video. Dragged the timeline back. Watched it again. Nothing. Just an ordinary hallway. No face. No eyes. They increased the brightness. Still nothing. They laughed to themselves. I must have imagined it. It made sense. After all, they'd had a long day. They'd been staring at screens for hours. Their brain was probably just looking for something frightening because, well, they were listening to a horror story. So they kept watching. The next few images were just as ordinary. A rainy street. A quiet bedroom. A train station with no passengers. Nothing hiding in the shadows. Nothing staring back. They almost felt embarrassed for rewinding. Maybe they'd simply expected something scary to appear. Maybe their imagination had filled in the blanks. Then, without warning, their room felt colder. Just for a heartbeat. Their pulse quickened. Not from what they saw. From what they felt. That same impossible sensation from earlier. As though someone had quietly entered the room without making a sound. They looked toward the bedroom door. It was closed. The window. Locked. Everything exactly as it had been. They looked back at the screen. The hallway was gone. The image had already changed. No eyes. No proof. Nothing unusual. The story finished a few minutes later. They removed one earbud. The room was silent. Eventually they turned off their phone, rolled onto one side, and convinced themselves they had imagined all of it. The cold, the strange feeling, the eyes, every last bit of it. Because tired minds notice patterns that aren't really there. Don't they? Maybe there were never any eyes in that hallway. Maybe exhaustion made shadows look like faces. Maybe their imagination simply got carried away. Or maybe some things only need a single moment, just long enough to know you've noticed them, and never long enough for you to prove they were ever there at all. A software engineer and his obsession. If you've ever worked in tech, you know something nobody tells you in college. The hardest part isn't learning to code. It isn't debugging. It isn't the impossible deadlines. It's realizing one day that you've spent years working toward a life where the brightest thing you'll see for 15 hours straight is the glow of a server rack. This story is about a software engineer. He wasn't brilliant. He wasn't particularly social either. He simply worked harder than everyone else. For years of university, internships, late nights, energy drinks, empty weekends, all to finally land what he believed was his dream job, only to discover his dream involved spending most of every shift alone inside chilled server rooms. The servers never complained, never judged him, never asked about his weekend. They simply hummed, hour after hour, day after day. By the end of each shift, his eyes burned from staring at monitoring dashboards. Dark circles settled permanently beneath them. He stopped remembering what day of the week it was. Lunch became whatever fit inside a vending machine. His apartment slowly became another place to sleep before repeating the same routine. He wasn't depressed. Not exactly. He was just existing. Then one Monday morning, someone new joined the infrastructure team. She couldn't have been taller than 5'3". Petite. Soft-spoken. She wore long black bangs that covered much of her face, as though eye contact itself made her uncomfortable. Whenever someone asked her a question, she'd quietly answer without looking directly at them. She almost seemed afraid of the office. The manager explained her role. She would relay requests between departments while the engineer remained inside the restricted server rooms. It sounded insignificant, until the first time she opened the heavy security door. They're asking if server 12 can be restarted. That was it. One sentence, barely above a whisper. Yet somehow, it became the highlight of his day. Soon he found himself checking the clock. She usually came around 11. Then again sometime after 4. Twice a day. Always carrying a tablet. Always speaking softly. Always leaving before he could think of anything clever to say. He began shaving before work again. Straightening his shirt. Fixing his hair in the reflection of the server cabinet doors. Ridiculous things. Things he hadn't cared about in years. Eventually the loneliness became stronger than the fear. One Friday afternoon, just as she turned to leave, he cleared his throat. "Would you maybe want to have dinner sometime?" For a second she didn't respond. Then, she smiled. It wasn't a large smile. Just enough to show the corners of her mouth lifting. "I'd like that." He could barely believe it. For the first time in years, he spent an entire weekend excited about something. They agreed to meet Tuesday evening. He arrived 10 minutes early. She was already there, waiting. A half-empty bottle of red wine sat between two glasses. She had clearly been there for some time. "I hope you don't mind," she said softly. "I ordered while I waited." He smiled. "I don't drink much." "That's all right." The waiter approached without needing to ask what she wanted. "The usual?" She nodded. "The usual." Moments later, a plate arrived. Rare beef. So rare it barely looked cooked. The waiter didn't even ask how she'd like it prepared. He already knew. She thanked him by name. He found that odd. "This place knows you well. I come here often." She cut into the meat. No hesitation. No embarrassment. For someone who barely spoke in the office, she suddenly seemed different. Relaxed. Confident. She laughed more. Held eye contact longer. Even reached across the table, brushing his hand with her fingertips while laughing at one of his terrible jokes. He couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at him that way. Maybe, he thought, she'd only been shy at work. The evening passed faster than he wanted. Just as he was working up the courage to ask if she'd like to come back to his apartment, she spoke first. "Would you like to see my place instead?" He almost answered too quickly. "Sure." She smiled again. This time, something about it lingered a little longer than before. They drove for almost 40 minutes. Streetlights became fewer. Buildings disappeared. Eventually, only one structure remained nearby. An old brick building surrounded by rusted fencing. A sign stood outside. "County Postmortem Office." He slowed the car. "You live out here?" She noticed him staring. "Oh." She laughed quietly. "The postmortem office? It belonged to my aunt." The answer somehow made him feel worse. Her house stood alone beyond it. Large. Old. Almost completely hidden behind overgrown trees. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust. And something metallic he couldn't quite identify. Portraits covered the walls. Most were too old to recognize. Heavy curtains blocked every window despite it only being evening. He noticed strange objects hanging from the hallway walls. Bundles of dried herbs. Small carved figures. Old keys tied together with faded red thread. None of it made sense. She disappeared into the kitchen. "I'll bring us something to drink." He wandered toward the entrance hall. One portrait caught his attention. An elderly woman. Sharp cheekbones. Long dark bangs. A familiar smile. Not identical, but close enough to make him uncomfortable. "So that's your aunt?" He called toward the kitchen. "Yes." Her voice sounded oddly distant. He studied the painting longer. The artist had captured something unsettling about the woman's expression. It wasn't happiness. It was anticipation. She returned carrying 2 glasses. Dark red liquid. He assumed it was more wine. It tasted unusually sweet. Warmer than it should have been. His eyelids suddenly felt heavy. "You all right?" she asked gently. "Aye." The room tilted. His heartbeat slowed. The portrait seemed closer. His vision blurred. The last thing he saw clearly was her walking toward the large painting. Standing beside it. Smiling. That same smile. Only now, it stretched just a little wider. She brushed her bangs away from her face for the first time. "I should tell you something." Her voice no longer sounded timid. "My name isn't the one I gave the company." He tried to stand. His legs wouldn't move. She rested one hand on the portrait's frame.
"My real name is Narration Drusilla the First."
She spoke the exact name written beneath the old woman's painting. The woman she called was her aunt. His eyes drifted from the painting. Back to her. Then to the painting again. The faces weren't merely similar anymore. They were identical. Not like a granddaughter. Not like a niece. The same eyes. The same grin. The same impossible face. His final coherent thought wasn't that she'd lied. It was something far worse. The portrait hanging in that hallway looked newer than the rest, as though it hadn't been painted decades ago, as though someone had only recently finished it, and had somehow known exactly what she would look like tonight. Obsession or prison? There are stories about demons that offer power, stories about spirits that grant wealth, stories about creatures that promise eternal life. But the oldest creatures don't tempt you with what you need. They tempt you with the one thing you cannot bear to lose. This story begins in the late 1500s, in a kingdom where survival depended less on kindness than obedience. The wealthy spoke of faith while dining beneath chandeliers. The poor prayed for rain that never came. Every summer the crops failed. Every winter another village disappeared beneath hunger. Outside the walls of noble estates, children barely older than 10 worked fields until their hands bled. Men killed one another over coins worth less than a loaf of bread. Disease claimed entire families before they reached 30. Inside the estates, nothing had changed. Banquets continued. Actors performed tales of forbidden romance beneath painted ceilings while servants quietly carried away leftovers that could have fed dozens outside the gates. Power belonged to those who controlled fear. Anyone who questioned the crown, questioned the church, or questioned the taxes was branded a heretic. Some disappeared. Others burned. The kingdom called it justice. History called it order. Among those fortunate enough to live inside that world was a 12-year-old girl named Zara. Her father collected taxes for the ruling nobility, not because he enjoyed it, but because refusing meant joining those who starved. Their mansion sat atop a lonely hill overlooking exhausted farmland. To everyone else it was a symbol of privilege. To Zara, it was home. She knew every hallway, every loose floorboard, every creaking staircase. She raced barefoot across polished wooden floors despite the servants constantly scolding her. She slid down the curved banisters whenever nobody was watching. She hid behind enormous velvet curtains during games she played entirely by herself. Her favorite place was the attic, a forgotten room tucked beneath the roof where old furniture gathered dust beside trunks that hadn't been opened in generations. Sunlight slipped through cracked wooden beams every afternoon, turning floating dust into tiny golden stars. Whenever the adults argued, whenever her mother grew too sick to leave bed, whenever loneliness became too heavy, Zara climbed into the attic. It became her kingdom, her secret place, the only place that truly belonged to her. Children from nearby villages never visited. They worked from sunrise until sunset. Play was a luxury hunger had stolen from them years earlier. So Zara invented imaginary adventures among forgotten antiques. Until one afternoon, something moved beneath an old linen sheet. At first she thought it was a rat. Then she heard it. A tiny whimper. She carefully lifted the cloth. Curled inside was the strangest creature she had ever seen. It possessed thin bird-like legs, broken feathered wings, tiny clawed hands. Its face looked disturbingly human. Not beautiful, not angelic, merely wrong. Its eyes watched her without blinking. She should have screamed. Instead, she pitied it. The creature could barely stand. Its wings dragged helplessly across the floor. Quietly, she carried it upstairs hidden beneath her cloak. She stole scraps from dinner. Bread, fruit, cheese. The creature ignored them all. It only sniffed once before turning away. The next evening she secretly brought cooked meat. Again, nothing. On the third night curiosity overcame caution. She slipped into the kitchen before sunrise and stole a piece of nearly uncooked beef meant for tomorrow's feast. The creature devoured it instantly. Blood stained its tiny lips. When it finished, it looked at her, almost gratefully. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Its feathers regained their color. Its wings slowly healed. It perched comfortably upon attic beams while Zara read stories aloud. Sometimes it performed tiny tricks. A candle lighting without flame. A wooden toy moving by itself. A feather floating against the wind. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make a lonely child laugh. For the first time in years, Zara no longer felt alone. Meanwhile, her mother continued growing weaker. The physicians blamed strange illnesses. The priests blamed weak faith. Her father blamed age. Yet none of them understood why healthy skin slowly turned pale, or why every month she seemed to lose another piece of herself. Then came the letter. A royal seal. A marriage arrangement. A distant baron, 4 times wealthier than Zara's family, had requested her hand. She was only 12. No one asked what she wanted. Children of noble blood belonged first to their family, then to politics, never to themselves. That night, she climbed into the attic sobbing. She buried her face against old wooden beams. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "I don't want another house. I don't want another family. I just want to stay here forever." The creature landed beside her. For the first time, it spoke. Its voice sounded like dry leaves scraping stone. "Forever?" Zara froze. "You can talk?" It tilted its head. "If your heart desires only this house, would you give anything to keep it?" She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She was 12. "Yes." The creature smiled. Not kindly. Hungrily. "So witnessed." It replied. The next morning, her father was found dead at the foot of the grand staircase. His neck broken. No witnesses. That evening, her mother's breathing quietly stopped. The doctors called it illness. The priests called it God's will. Within days, Zara inherited everything. The mansion, the surrounding land, every servant, every field, every life attached to the estate. She never questioned the timing. She only remembered. She hadn't been taken away. Months passed. Then the land began dying. Grass yellowed. Trees withered. Animals stopped breeding. Workers complained of unbearable exhaustion. Entire families wasted away despite having enough food. Every year the estate looked older. Every year, Zara somehow looked healthier. The creature no longer resembled the broken animal she'd rescued. Its wings stretched nearly from wall to wall. Its eyes gleamed with unnatural intelligence. Its appetite also changed. Rare meat no longer satisfied it. It demanded fresher meals, warmer meals, living ones. The first servant disappeared during harvest. Then another. Soon no one dared wander the estate alone after sunset. Whenever the creature fed, the mansion somehow grew brighter. The gardens briefly bloomed again. The walls seemed younger. The house itself was alive. Zara wanted to run. She couldn't. Every attempt ended the same way. She reached the estate gates and found herself somehow standing inside the attic again. The creature watched from the rafters. "You wish to remain. You shall." Years became decades. Decades became centuries. The mansion never truly collapsed. It merely waited. Each new owner believed they had inherited abandoned wealth. Each eventually vanished. Only Zara remained. still gathering offerings, still obeying, still imprisoned by the very wish she had begged for as a lonely child. One evening, unable to endure the silence any longer, she searched through her mother's old belongings. Hidden beneath a false drawer, she found a journal. Most pages described ordinary life, until the final entries. The handwriting grew weaker.
I was born a peasant. I loved the tax collector's son. He would never have noticed me. So I climbed into the attic. There was a wounded thing. It asked me one question. What do you desire most? I wished for his love. It granted my wish. He married me. But every year, I feel less like myself. It says love requires feeding. The estate grows stronger. I grow weaker. If my daughter ever finds it, she must never answer its questions.
Zara lowered the journal. Slowly. Very slowly. She looked upward. The creature already knew. It was waiting above her. Watching. Smiling. The same smile it had worn the day she answered without thinking. Because that had always been its true hunger. Not flesh. Not blood. Obsession. Every generation it searched for someone who loved one thing more than anything else. A home. A title. A lover. A family. A dream. Then it granted that wish by turning it into a cage. And somewhere inside that forgotten attic, if you listen carefully, you can still hear a girl's voice. Not asking to leave. Not begging for help. Only repeating the same words she spoke centuries ago.
I just want to stay here forever.
Some wishes are answered exactly as they're asked.
Story 4, The Lost Signal. Have you ever wondered why some people listen to horror stories every single night? Not because they enjoy being scared, but because they're quietly hoping one of them is true. This story is about someone exactly like that. Someone who never really fit into the world around them. They could laugh, hold conversations, go to work, study, smile when expected. Yet every day felt painfully predictable. Wake up, skip breakfast, promise yourself you'll eat later, scroll for a while, work until your eyes burn, come home exhausted, sleep, repeat. Nothing extraordinary ever happened. Maybe that's why they became obsessed with horror. Not monsters, not ghosts, possibility. Every night they searched YouTube hoping to discover something different. Something that didn't feel manufactured. Their searches became almost ritualistic. True horror stories. Real paranormal encounters. Police horror. Scariest stories that actually happened. Deep down, they weren't searching for entertainment. They were searching for proof. Proof that somewhere, reality still had secrets. One night, after another exhausting day, they found a channel they had never seen before. The Lost Signal. It looked new. Just a few hundred subscribers. Only a handful of uploads. Nothing flashy. No exaggerated thumbnails. One compilation caught their attention. 4 horror stories based on true real life. The thumbnail showed only a dim apartment hallway. No monster. No blood. No glowing eyes. Just darkness. Simple enough to make them click. The first story began. An ordinary day. A routine. A strange feeling of being watched. inside a video. Or perhaps never existed at all. The narrator never confirmed anything. That uncertainty stayed with them. The second story followed. A lonely software engineer. A quiet girl. An isolated house. An impossible ending. Then the third. A forgotten mansion. An ancient creature. A wish that became a prison. By now they smiled. Okay. The first two felt believable. But this one, no chance. They leaned back, enjoying the fiction for what it was. When the compilation ended, something bothered them. Not the mansion. Not the fairy. The eyes. Story 1. The narrator had mentioned them several times. Yet, they had never actually seen them. Curiosity got the better of them. They dragged the timeline back to the beginning. Paused. Advanced frame by frame. The hallway. The staircase. The rainy street. Nothing. Again. Nothing. They increased the brightness. Still nothing. Did I imagine that? Another rewind. Another search. Nothing. A smile crossed their face. Clever. They're making everyone think there were hidden eyes. Then they opened the comments. One read, I finally found them after my third watch. Another replied, don't. I wish I never paused. Someone else wrote, the thumbnail changed. Another answered, no, it didn't. The arguments continued for pages. Some insisted there had never been any eyes. Others claimed they saw them immediately. Neither side could convince the other. Curious now, they expanded the video's description. Only one sentence had been written beneath the upload. If you saw the eyes, then you already know why these stories were recorded. They laughed. Good marketing. Nothing more. Probably. Then, without warning, the compilation continued. No transition. No fade. The screen remained black. A tired man's voice quietly spoke. I didn't expect anyone to stay until the end. A long silence followed. My name isn't important anymore. I used to maintain servers. I spent years inside rooms where machines became easier to understand than people. I recorded these stories because nobody believed what happened after the first one. Another pause. You've probably been searching for the eyes. I know. I did exactly the same thing. They aren't hidden inside the video. They never were. They were only ever in one place. Silence. The thumbnail. A quiet breath. The hallway wasn't empty. You simply weren't looking there yet. The eyes belonged to me. They were taken long before I recorded any of this. You've already seen them. Whether you recognized them doesn't matter. Another pause. I've spent a long time wondering how to escape. I thought passing the stories on would help. I thought someone else would understand. Instead, his voice cracked into a weary laugh. I've only been creating more listeners. Another long silence. If you're waiting for a face to appear, it won't. If you're expecting a loud scream, there isn't one. That part already happened. You clicked the thumbnail. You looked exactly where I once looked. And that was enough. The voice grew quieter. I've been talking this entire time because I wanted you to hear my side before mine becomes yours. A faint hum echoed behind him. Almost like distant servers. Almost. I won't ask you to believe me. You'll decide for yourself. Maybe this was only another horror story. Maybe you've just been staring at a thumbnail the same question. The humming stopped. Everything became silent. What do you desire the most? The recording ended. The video reached its conclusion. No jump scare. No monster. Only an ordinary thumbnail still sitting above the title. An empty hallway. And if you looked at it one last time, you might find yourself wondering whether it had always looked exactly the way you remembered.